The cargo ship shuddered as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and Commander Lyra Chun gripped the armrest of her chair with white knuckles. She hated this part of every journey. The moment when the Valkyrie inspection station would appear on her view screen like a metal spider waiting for its prey. Inspection protocols initiating, her communications officer announced, his voice flat and tired. They had done this 1,000 times before, and it never got easier. Lyra stood from her chair and straightened her uniform. The fabric was worn at the elbows and the collar was frayed. But uniforms were expensive, and human cargo crews did not earn much under Concorde regulations 200 years ago. Humanity had reached the stars with hope in their hearts and dreams of discovery in their minds. They had built ships and launched them into the darkness, expecting to find wonders and perhaps even friends among the distant lights. What they found instead was the Concorde of elder races, a coalition of 12 ancient species who had ruled the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. The Concorde had looked at humanity the way a farmer looks at cattle. Not with hatred, not with fear, but with the calm certainty that these creatures existed only to serve a purpose. Humans were classified as a tithe species, which meant they were allowed to exist as long as they paid tribute in resources, labor, and territory. Earth itself remained free, protected by treaties that the Concorde honored because it cost them nothing. But every human colony beyond the home system operated under alien supervision. The airlock hissed open and 3 Valkyrie inspectors entered the ship. They were tall creatures, nearly 8 feet in height, with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like oil on water. Their faces held no expression that humans could read. But Lyra had learned to recognize the slight tilt of their heads that indicated contempt. Cargo manifest, the lead inspector demanded. Extending one of his 4 hands, Lyra handed over the data tablet and watched as the inspector scrolled through the information. The cargo was nothing special, just medical supplies bound for the colony on Kepler 442b. But every shipment required inspection, and every inspection required submission. Your fuel reserves exceed standard allocation by 4%. The inspector announced. Lyra's jaw tightened. This was a game they played every time, finding small violations to justify additional fees and delays. The fuel reserves were within legal limits, she knew. But arguing with a Valkyrie inspector was like arguing with a wall that could have you arrested. "We will pay the excess fuel tax," she said quietly. The inspector made a sound that might have been satisfaction. "See that you do." Humanity's continued existence within Concorde space depends on compliance. Behind Lyra, she heard one of her crew members shift his weight. His name was Torres, a young engineer from the Mars colonies, and she knew without looking that his hands were clenched into fists. She caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of her head. Not here, not now, not ever. Resistance meant death, and death helped no one. The inspection took 3 hours. The Valkyrie examined every container, scanned every crew member, and asked questions designed to humiliate rather than inform. When they finally left, Lyra felt like she had been scrubbed raw from the inside out. How much longer? Torres whispered once the airlock sealed shut. Lyra did not answer. She could not answer because the truth was too heavy to speak aloud. This would continue forever, or at least until humanity no longer existed. The Concorde had done this before, she knew. Broken young species down until they forgot they had ever been anything other than servants. She returned to her quarters and pulled up a holographic image that she kept hidden in her personal files. It showed a young man with her same dark eyes and sharp cheekbones, standing in front of a small house with blue flowers growing in the garden. Marcus Chen, her younger brother, lived on New Cascadia with his wife and 2 daughters. He had left Earth to find a better life, and for a while it seemed like he had found one. New Cascadia was a beautiful world, green and blue and full of promise. 4 million humans called it home, building cities and farms and futures for their children. The Concorde allowed the colony to exist because it produced valuable minerals and because the humans there had always paid their tithes on time. Lyra touched the image and wished she could reach through it to hold her brother one more time. They spoke when they could, through messages that took days to travel between stars, and every conversation ended the same way. "Stay safe," she would say, and "You too," he would reply. And neither of them would mention the fear that lived in their chests like a second heartbeat elsewhere in the galaxy. In a chamber made of crystal and light, Ambassador Korath Valshin addressed the Concorde Assembly. He was old for his kind, nearly 300 standard years, and he had spent most of those years studying the younger races that fell under Concorde protection. "Humanity is progressing well," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "Their compliance rates have increased by 12% over the last decade. Their population growth remains within acceptable parameters, and their technological development has been successfully restricted to approved categories." A delegate from the Kreth Collective, a species of silicon-based beings who communicated through electromagnetic pulses, flickered with skepticism. "And their spirit?" the Kreth asked. "Have you broken it yet?" Korath considered the question. "Humans are resilient creatures," he admitted. "They adapt rather than surrender. But adaptation is acceptable as long as it occurs within boundaries we control. They have learned that resistance is futile and that cooperation brings rewards. In another century or two, they will forget they ever dreamed of anything else." The Assembly accepted this report and moved on to other matters. Humanity was not important enough to discuss at length. Just another young species being managed for the benefit of the Concorde. But Korath Valshin did not tell the Assembly everything. He did not mention the strange patterns he had noticed in human cargo shipments, the way certain data packets seemed to carry more information than their size suggested. He did not mention the whispered words he had overheard human workers exchanging when they thought no one was listening. He did not mention the fire he sometimes saw burning in human eyes, a fire that submission should have extinguished long ago. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself that humans were too weak and too divided to pose any real threat. He told himself that the galaxy had seen countless young species rise and fall, and humanity would be no different in the darkness between stars. Something was stirring. It moved through encrypted channels and hidden frequencies, passing from ship to ship and colony to colony like a heartbeat that the Concorde could not hear. It had no name yet, this thing that was growing in the shadows, but it had a purpose. Humanity was not broken. Humanity was waiting. The message arrived on a Tuesday, which Lyra would remember for the rest of her life. It came through official channels, broadcast to every human ship and colony in Concorde space, and its words burned themselves into her mind like fire burns itself into flesh. The human colony designated New Cascadia has been found in violation of Expansion Treaty 7, the announcement declared. Unauthorized settlement beyond approved boundaries has been confirmed. Punishment has been determined by the Concorde Assembly. Total sterilization will commence in 72 hours. Lyra read the message 3 times before her brain allowed her to understand it. Total sterilization was not a warning or a fine or even imprisonment. It was erasure. It was death for every living thing on the planet, down to the smallest insect and the deepest root. It was the Concorde's way of reminding young species that some rules could never be broken. Her brother lived on New Cascadia. His wife lived there. His daughters lived there. 4 million human beings lived there. And in 72 hours they would all be dead. "Captain," Torres said from the doorway. His face was pale and his voice was shaking. "What do we do?" Lyra did not hesitate. "We go to New Cascadia. That is forbidden," her first officer protested. The Concorde has declared a quarantine zone. Any ship entering the system will be destroyed. Then we die trying, Lyra said, and her voice was made of iron and ice. Plot the course. The journey took 49 hours at maximum speed, burning through fuel reserves that Lyra knew they would never be able to replace. She did not sleep during those hours. She sat in the command chair and watched the stars streak past and thought about her brother's face when he smiled. She thought about the message she had sent him 2 weeks ago, asking about the girls and whether they had started school yet. She thought about the message he had sent back, full of small details about daily life and ending with the words, "We are happy here." She thought about all the messages they would never send again. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the new Cascadia system, and Lyra finally understood what hell looked like. The Volcari cleansing fleet hung in space like a crown of thorns around a condemned world. There were hundreds of ships, more than Lyra had ever seen gathered in one place, and each one carried enough firepower to reduce a continent to ash. Around them, a handful of human vessels drifted helplessly. Trapped inside the quarantine zone with nowhere to run, "We are receiving a transmission from the surface," her communications officer whispered. The view screen flickered and Marcus Chun appeared. He was standing in his living room. Lyra recognized the blue curtains behind him, and his daughters were clutching his legs with terror in their eyes. His wife was nowhere to be seen. "Lyra," Marcus said, and his voice cracked on her name. "You should not have come. You cannot save us." "No one can save us. I had to try," Lyra said, and tears were streaming down her face. "I had to see you one more time," Marcus smiled, and it was the saddest smile Lyra had ever witnessed. "Tell the universe what they did here," he said. "Tell them what the Concorde does to those who dream too big. Tell them we were not criminals. We just wanted to give our children more room to grow." The transmission cut to static as the bombardment began. Lyra watched through the view screen as beams of energy fell from the Valkyrie ships like rain from a poisoned sky. They struck the planet in patterns designed for maximum coverage, turning forests into infernos and cities into craters. The oceans boiled and the atmosphere caught fire, and the world that 4 million people had called home became nothing but a burning grave. The attack lasted 3 days. 3 days of fire and death while human ships watched helplessly from the edge of the system. 3 days while the rest of the galaxy observed with the detached interest of scientists studying an experiment. When it was over, New Cascadia was a dead rock spinning silently around its star. Nothing remained of the blue flowers that had grown in Marcus Chun's garden. Nothing remained of his daughter's laughter or his wife's cooking or his dreams of a better future. Nothing remained at all. Ambassador Korath Velshen appeared on every view screen in the galaxy to deliver the official statement. "This was not cruelty," he announced, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "This was correction. Humanity will learn, as all young species do, that expansion has boundaries. The Concorde takes no pleasure in discipline, but discipline must be maintained." Lyra listened to those words and felt something change inside her. The grief was there, burning in her chest like a star going supernova, but something else was growing alongside it. It was cold where the grief was hot, hard where the grief was sharp, and it spread through her body like ice forming on a lake. She was not alone. Across human space, billions of people watched the same broadcast and felt the same transformation. Mothers held their children tighter, and fathers looked at the stars with new eyes, and soldiers who had accepted defeat began to remember what anger felt like. The United Terran Assembly called an emergency session. But they did not call for war. Officially, Earth issued formal protests and demanded investigations and followed every diplomatic procedure that the Concorde had designed to keep young species busy. While nothing actually changed, but something else was happening in the shadows. Encrypted messages flew between ships and colonies and secret installations that the Concorde did not know existed. Old plans were dusted off, and new resources were allocated, and people who had spent years pretending to be broken finally admitted the truth to each other. Humanity had been waiting for a sign, some terrible proof that submission would never be enough, that compliance would never bring safety, that the only path forward was the one they had been afraid to take. New Cascadia was that sign. 4 million dead, including a man who just wanted his daughters to have room to grow. And the galaxy had watched without lifting a finger to help Lyra Chen return to Earth 2 weeks after the burning. She walked through the halls of a building that did not appear on any map and met with people whose names she would never learn. They asked her one question: "Are you ready to fight?" She thought about Marcus. She thought about his girls. She thought about blue flowers burning in an alien fire. "I have been ready my whole life," she answered. "I just did not know it until now." The galaxy believed humanity was broken. The galaxy believed wrong. 6 months passed after the burning of New Cascadia, and the galaxy noticed something strange. Humanity had gone quiet. There were no more protests, no more diplomatic complaints, no more angry broadcasts demanding justice. Human cargo ships continued their routes with heads bowed and voices soft. Human workers on Concorde stations performed their duties without meeting anyone's eyes. Human colonies paid their tithes on time and never spoke of the 4 million dead, the Volcari. Observers reported that humanity had finally accepted its place in the galactic order. The other elder races nodded in satisfaction and turned their attention to more important matters. Another young species had been taught its lesson, and the universe could continue as it always had. Ambassador Korath Faushan was not so certain. He watched the human reports with growing unease, searching for something he could not name. The silence was too complete, he thought. The submission was too perfect. It was like watching a predator pretend to be prey, but his concerns were dismissed by the Concorde Assembly. "You have spent too long studying humans," they told him. "You see threats where none exist. Focus on productive work and let the past remain buried." Korath obeyed, because that was what one did when the assembly spoke. But he could not shake the feeling that he was missing something important. He was right to worry deep beneath the surface of Europa. One of the frozen moons of Jupiter, a city existed that no Concorde sensor had ever detected. It was called Prometheus Station, and it was the heart of humanity's secret war. Lyra Chun walked through corridors carved from ancient ice and saw the face of human defiance everywhere she looked. Engineers worked on weapons that should not exist. Soldiers trained in combat techniques designed to kill beings twice their size. Scientists studied captured Concorde technology and found ways to turn it against its creators. "Welcome to the Resistance," said the woman waiting for her at the end of the corridor. Admiral Yuki Tanaka was old, her hair white as snow and her face lined with decades of careful deception. She had been preparing for this moment since before Lyra was born, building this hidden army one piece at a time while the galaxy looked the other way. "How long?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Since first contact," Tanaka answered. There were those among us who knew from the beginning that the Concorde would never see humanity as equals. We hoped we were wrong. We prepared as if we were right. She led Lyra deeper into the station, past training facilities and weapons factories and hangars full of ships that Lyra had never seen before. They were sleek and deadly, designed for speed and destruction. Nothing like the clumsy cargo vessels that humanity was permitted to operate. The Concorde believes we cannot fight because we have never fought, Tanaka explained. They mistake patience for weakness and silence for surrender. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was teaching us exactly how they wage war. Human workers had served on Concorde stations for generations, Lyra realized. Human servants had cleaned Concorde homes and maintained Concorde ships, and watched Concord officers discuss strategy without ever considering that the quiet creatures in the corner might be listening. The elder races had handed humanity a complete education in their own destruction. We call it the Nemesis Protocol. Tanaka continued. For each elder race, we have developed specific countermeasures. The Velkari communicate through biological networks that our engineered viruses can disrupt. The Kreth depend on electromagnetic fields that our pulse weapons can collapse. The Ithrani navigate using gravity that our missiles can distort. And the others? Lyra asked. Tanaka smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who had waited a very long time for revenge. We have plans for all of them, but weapons were only part of the strategy. The true strength of the Nemesis Protocol lay in its human element. Across Concord space, thousands of agents had positioned themselves in places where they could do the most damage when the time came. Human technicians maintained communication relays that connected the elder races to each other. Human engineers serviced the engines that powered Concord warships. Human laborers loaded the supplies that kept Concord stations running. They had been invisible for so long that no one remembered to watch them anymore. When we strike, Tanaka said, we will strike everywhere at once. The Concord has never faced an enemy who was already inside their walls. Lyra thought about New Cascadia, about Marcus and his daughters, about the fire that had consumed everything she loved. When? She asked. 1 year from today, Tanaka answered. On the anniversary of the burning. We want them to understand exactly why this is happening. The year that followed was the longest of Lyra's life. She trained in combat and strategy and the 1,000 small skills that soldiers needed to survive. She learned to pilot the new warships and to fire the new weapons and to kill without hesitation when the moment required it. She learned to hate with precision instead of passion around her. An army was taking shape. Men and women from every human colony, united by grief and anger and the cold determination to make the elder races pay for centuries of humiliation. They came from cargo ships and mining stations and servant quarters. Ordinary people who had been pushed too far and were ready to push back on the day before the anniversary. Lyra stood on the bridge of the TFS Reckoning and looked out at a fleet that should not exist. 3,000 warships hung in the darkness beyond Neptune, hidden from Concord sensors by technology that human scientists had stolen and improved. 3,000 ships crewed by men and women who had everything to lose and nothing left to fear. Admiral Tanaka's voice came through the communication system, reaching every ship in the fleet. Tomorrow we remind the galaxy that humanity was never broken. We were never tamed. We were never truly conquered. We were just waiting for the right moment. Lyra closed her eyes and saw her brother's face one last time. For New Cascadia, she whispered around her. 3,000 crews whispered the same words. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn what happened when humans finally fought back. The countdown had reached 0. The first hour began at midnight, Galactic Standard Time. Exactly 1 year after New Cascadia burned across 12 star systems. Human workers who had spent their lives being invisible suddenly became the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Communication technicians disabled relay stations with codes they had memorized years ago. Engineers triggered overloads in power systems they had been maintaining for decades. Servants opened doors that should have remained locked and let death walk through. The Concord of elder races woke to chaos. For the first time in 10,000 years, they could not talk to each other. Their networks were silent, their stations were dark, and their carefully maintained order was crumbling around them. Ambassador Korath Velshin was aboard a diplomatic vessel when the lights went out. He stumbled through corridors that had suddenly become unfamiliar and found his way to the observation deck just in time to see something impossible. Human warships were emerging from the darkness, hundreds of them appearing where nothing should exist. and they were heading straight for the Valkyrie orbital station that hung above the nearest human colony. "That cannot be," Korath whispered. But his eyes told him it was true. The second hour brought war to every corner of human space. Valkyrie stations that had stood for centuries fell in minutes, as human fleets unleashed weapons the elder races had never imagined. The Nemesis protocol worked exactly as designed, targeting each species with attacks tailored to exploit their specific weaknesses. The Valkyrie hive networks collapsed as engineered viruses spread through their biological communication systems. Officers who had commanded thousands of ships suddenly found themselves alone, cut off from their subordinates and unable to coordinate any defense. They fought as individuals against an enemy that moved as one. Lyra Chun led her squadron against the largest Valkyrie station in the sector, a massive structure that had monitored human activity for 100 years. She remembered all the time she had docked at this station, all the inspections she had endured, all the humiliations she had swallowed. Now she was coming back with fire instead of cargo. "All ships, attack pattern Delta," she ordered. And her voice was calm despite the thunder of her heart. The Reckoning led the charge, weaving through defensive fire that seemed slow and clumsy compared to the simulations Lyra had run 1,000 times. Valkyrie ships scrambled to respond, but their movements were uncoordinated. Each captain fighting alone while human squadrons worked together like the fingers of a single fist. The station's shields fell after 40 minutes of concentrated assault. Lyra watched as boarding pods launched from human ships and attached themselves to the structure like parasites. Inside those pods, soldiers who had trained for this moment, their entire lives were ready to take the fight to the enemy, face to face. Broadcast to all Valkyrie frequencies, Lyra commanded. "Surrender now and your lives will be spared. Continue fighting and you will share the fate you gave New Cascadia." Some surrendered. Many did not. It made no difference to the outcome across the galaxy. Other species watched with growing horror as humanity tore through Valkyrie defenses like a storm through paper. The Kreth Collective decided to intervene, sending a fleet of 300 ships to reinforce their allies, certain that their superior technology would turn the tide. They never reached their destination. Human gravity mines activated in their path, creating distortions that tore ships apart from the inside. The Kreth flagship lasted longest, its captain transmitting desperate warnings to anyone who would listen. But the warnings came too late to save anyone. They were never primitive. Ambassador Korath broadcast from his diplomatic vessel, hoping someone would hear. They were waiting. They learned everything while we thought they were learning nothing. They were always waiting. The battle for Velkar Prime began on the third day. The homeworld of the Valkyrie Dominion was the most heavily defended place in Concord space, surrounded by orbital fortresses and patrol fleets and defensive systems that have been built over millennia. It should have been impregnable. Lyra led the first wave, her ship dancing through a storm of enemy fire while her weapons carved paths through the orbital defenses. Around her, human pilots flew with a skill that came from desperation and training and rage. Their ships moving in patterns that the Valkyrie computers could not predict. They fight without logic. A Valkyrie commander complained in an intercepted transmission. They accept losses that no rational species would accept. They should be retreating, but they keep attacking. What the commander did not understand was that humans had stopped being rational the day New Cascadia burned. This was not a war of strategy for them. It was a war of grief and anger, and all the dark emotions that the elder races had thought they could crush out of a younger species. Admiral Tanaka's voice echoed across every human ship and every Concord frequency. Calm and cold and absolutely certain. "You taught us that the galaxy respects only strength. You taught us that weakness invites destruction. You taught us that mercy is a luxury that only the powerful can afford." Lesson learned. The orbital fortresses fell one by one. The patrol fleet scattered or surrendered. The defensive systems failed under attacks they had never been designed to withstand. By the 9th day, the Valkyrie Dominion was requesting terms of surrender 9 days. 9 days to bring an empire to its knees. 9 days to prove that humanity had never been as weak as it pretended to be. Other Concord races sent messages pledging neutrality. Some even offered assistance, eager to ally themselves with the new power in the galaxy. They had respected the Valkyrie out of fear. And now they respected humanity for the same reason Lyra stood on the bridge of the reckoning and looked down at Valkar Prime. A world that had ruled an empire and was now at her mercy. She thought about New Cascadia and Marcus and the blue flowers that had burned. She thought about all the years of submission and humiliation and hidden rage. She thought about what kind of species humanity wanted to become. Accept their surrender. She said finally, "The war is over," but the galaxy would never forget what had happened. The galaxy would never again mistake human silence for submission. The galaxy had learned, finally and forever, what happened when humans fought back. Everyone was still holding their breath. The war ended, but the silence did not. 3 months after the Valkyrie surrender, the concord of elder races dissolved. Some species withdrew to their homeworlds and sealed their borders, watching the stars with fear instead of arrogance. Others sent delegations to Earth, seeking treaties and alliances, desperate to position themselves on the right side of the new galactic order. None of them would ever look at humanity the same way again. Admiral Lyra Chen walked through the ruins of a Valkyrie city on a world whose name she did not know. The buildings were intact, the streets were clean, but there was no one here. The inhabitants had fled when human ships appeared in their sky, abandoning homes and possessions and centuries of history, rather than face the species they had once considered cattle. She should have felt triumph. She felt only exhaustion. Her communicator chirped, and Taurus's voice came through. "Admiral, the prisoner is ready for you." Ambassador Korath Velshin was waiting in a holding cell aboard the Reckoning. He had been captured during the final days of the war. His diplomatic vessel caught trying to evacuate civilians from a besieged colony. He had not resisted when human soldiers boarded his ship, had not protested when they placed him in restraints, had not spoken a single word during the journey to Earth until now. Lyra entered the cell and found him sitting on a simple bench, his forearms folded across his chest and his alien eyes watching her with an expression she could not read. He was smaller than she remembered, or perhaps she was simply no longer intimidated by his kind. "You wanted to speak with me," she said. Korath nodded slowly. "I wanted to understand. I have spent my entire life studying humanity, and I realize now that I understood nothing." "What is there to understand?" Lyra asked. "You burned our world. We burned yours. The galaxy taught us that strength was the only currency that mattered. We paid in full. Is that what you believe?" Korath asked. "That this was simply revenge?" Lyra considered the question. Maybe. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the only way we could survive in a galaxy that saw us as prey. The Valkyrie ambassador was quiet for a long moment. "My people believed we were protecting you," he said finally. "We believed that by keeping you weak, we were keeping you safe from worse fates. We had seen what happened to young species who tried to rise too fast. We thought we were being kind." "Kind," Lyra repeated, and the word tasted like ash in her mouth. "You murdered 4 million people as a lesson. You kept us in chains for 200 years. You taught our children that they were worthless. That was your kindness." Korath's head tilted in the gesture that Lyra now recognized as shame. "We were wrong. I see that now. But I wonder if you see something else." "What? You have become what we were," Korath said. "You have proven that humanity can destroy empires and reshape the galaxy. But power does not change its nature when it changes hands. The question is what you will do with it." Lyra had asked herself the same question 1,000 times since the war ended. She had watched human soldiers occupy Concord stations and human administrators take control of former Concord territories. She had seen the fear in alien eyes when human ships appeared, the same fear that humans had felt for 200 years. She had wondered if humanity was building a better future or simply repeating the past with different masters. "That is not for me to decide," she said. "Then who decides?" Korath asked. Lyra did not answer. She left the cell and walked through the corridors of her ship and tried not to think about blue flowers burning in alien fire. 1 year later, the Terran Covenant was established. It was not an empire, the founders insisted, but a federation of equal species built on principles that the old Concord had never understood. No species would be subjugated. No species would be erased. No species would be judged by its age or its technology or its appearance. The words were easy to write. Living up to them would be the challenge of generations. Lyra Chun stood in the Great Hall of the Covenant, assembly on the day when everything changed again. She was an admiral, now, one of the most powerful humans in the galaxy. But she still wore her old uniform with the frayed collar, because some things should not be forgotten. A delegation had arrived from beyond explored space, a species so new to the stars that they had not yet encountered the Concord or humanity or any of the politics that shaped this region of the galaxy. They were small creatures with large eyes and delicate limbs, and they had come seeking help. "Our neighbors are aggressive," the delegation leader explained, her voice trembling with fear. "They have taken 3 of our colonies and enslaved our people. We have no weapons to fight back. We heard that there is a species here that protects the weak. We came to ask for help." The assembly fell silent. Lyra watched the faces of the delegates around her and saw the debate playing out without words. Should humanity protect this species and risk war with an unknown enemy? Or should they focus on their own interests and let the small creatures face their fate alone? The choice was obvious, she thought. But obvious choices were often the hardest to make. She stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "What is your name?" she asked the delegation leader. "I am called Nira," the creature answered. Lyra knelt so that she was at eye level with the small ambassador. "Nira, I want you to listen to me very carefully. A long time ago, my people were in the same position you are in now. We were weak and alone and surrounded by enemies who saw us as prey. We asked the galaxy for help, and no one answered." She paused, remembering Marcus and New Cascadia and all the years of silence and submission. "We survived anyway. We learned to be strong. We learned to fight. But we also learned something else. We learned what it feels like to have no one standing beside you when the darkness closes in." Lyra stood and turned to face the assembly. The Terran Covenant was built on a promise. No species will be subjugated. No species will be erased. That promise means nothing if we only keep it when it is convenient. The debate lasted for hours, but in the end, the vote was unanimous. The Covenant would defend Nira's people. The Covenant would stand against tyranny wherever it found it. The Covenant would be what the Concord never was. As the assembly adjourned, Korath Velshin approached Lyra in the corridor. He had been freed months ago and now served as an advisor to the Covenant. One of several former enemies who had chosen to help build something new instead of mourning what was lost. "You have surprised me again," he said. Lyra smiled, and it was not a sad smile. "That is what humans do." She walked out of the assembly hall and looked up at the stars that had once been close to her kind. Somewhere out there, new threats were gathering, and old wounds were still healing, and the future was as uncertain as it had always been, but humanity was no longer waiting. Humanity was no longer silent. Humanity was finally free, and the galaxy was still holding its breath, wondering what humans would do next.